Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm just going to allow a couple minutes, maybe about 1 or 2 minutes, to allow for others to join. Good afternoon again. I am Jem Butler, Senior Director of Media Relations and Communications with NLIHC. Thank you for joining our press call today for the 2022 release of our annual report, Out of Reach, the High Cost of Housing. Today's call will begin with remarks from NLIHC's President and CEO, Diane Yantel. And we will also have an address from Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Chairwoman of the House Committee on Financial Services and the author of the report's preface. Chairwoman Waters is currently on the floor of the House and will join us as soon as she can. Ahead of that, we will have NLIHC research analyst Emma Foley provide a data summary of the report, and we're going to follow that with a brief Q&A session. We will address questions at the end of the call that are submitted via the Q&A box. So please do submit all of your questions there. If there are any remaining questions at the end of the call, or if you'd like to submit an interview request to have a discussion in more detail, please do email me directly at jbutler@nlihc.org. Thank you all again so much for joining today's press call, and I will now turn it over to NLIHC's President and CEO, Diane Yantel.
Great, thanks, Jen, and hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today for the release of this year's Out of Reach report, which highlights the housing wage, the amount someone must earn an hour in order to afford a modest studio, 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. This year, we're releasing the Out of Reach report amid record high inflation and skyrocketing rents. And these rent increases are affecting tenants nationwide, with median rents for 2 bedroom apartments increasing nearly 18% in the last year. At the same time, costs for necessities like food and transportation have also increased, leaving low-income renters with increasingly tighter budgets and forced to make difficult trade-offs in their budget, sacrificing childcare, medical care, and store-bought food in order to maintain a roof over their heads. Increased rents will also result in increased homelessness. And indeed, it already is in some communities around the country. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, has found that a $100 increase in rent is associated with a 9% increase in homelessness in that community. If rents continue to rise unchecked, homelessness will soar because we do not have a robust and permanent housing safety net to assist the lowest income and most marginalized people. Decades of chronic underfunding for housing assistance leaves us with a housing lottery system in our country where only the lucky 25% of eligible households get the housing assistance that they need. With rents rising rapidly, homelessness worsening, and millions of families struggling to stay housed, federal investments in expanding proven solutions like housing choice vouchers, the National Housing Trust Fund, and public housing are badly needed and long overdue. We should also note that we released this report today following news that the Democrats are going to move forward with a reconciliation bill that does not address the acute housing crisis throughout the country. And whatever the political reality of it, it is deeply disappointing and tremendously short-sighted to leave housing out of a reconciliation package. Housing costs are a primary driver of rising inflation, and a so-called Inflation Reduction Act that doesn't address skyrocketing rents and dwindling housing supply misses the point and leaves the lowest income renters and people experiencing homelessness to suffer from continued inaction. As a country, we have the data, partnerships, expertise, solutions, and means to end homelessness and housing poverty. We lack only the political will to fund solutions at the scale necessary. So I see that Chair Waters has not been able to join us yet. She's still on the House floor. So with that in mind, it's my pleasure to turn it over now to Emma Foley with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. She is a research analyst and a co-author of this year's Out of Reach report. And I'll turn it to Emma to share an overview and findings from the report.
Thank you, Diane, and hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'll be providing you with an overview of this year's report and some of the key themes and findings. And we can go ahead, perfect. Each year, Out of Reach answers the question, how much does a full-time worker need in order to afford rent and utilities at the fair market rent? The fair market rent is a HUD estimate of what a household moving today would have to pay for a modest apartment in a given area. And our definition of affordability aligns with the federal standard that households should not pay any more than 30% of their income towards rent. This year, we find that a full-time worker must earn $25.82 per hour to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment at the fair market rent, and must earn $21.25 per hour to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment at the fair market rent. This year's report finds once again that nowhere in the United States do minimum wage workers earn enough to afford a two-bedroom apartment at the fair market rent. And in only 91% of counties do minimum wage workers earn enough to afford a one-bedroom apartment. In addition to the national housing wage, Out of Reach includes housing wages for each state, metropolitan area, county, and combined non-metropolitan areas within a state. This map shows the two-bedroom housing wages for each state, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. As you might expect, housing wages are highest in traditionally high-cost states like California, New York, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. In all of these states, the housing wage exceeds $37 an hour. Despite the differences across states, though, the housing wage exceeds $15 in nearly every state. Next slide, please. The report also compares the cost of housing to what renter households in a variety of circumstances can afford, including households receiving SSI, unemployment insurance, and those below the federal poverty level. As you can see in this graph, households in a variety of circumstances struggle significantly to afford housing. The national one-bedroom fair market rent is $1,105, and the national two-bedroom fair market rent is $1,342. Households relying on supplemental security income, however, can only afford $252 per month. Households relying on unemployment insurance can only afford $529 per month, and households with incomes at the poverty level can only afford $694 per month. All of these fall far short of the one and two bedroom fair market rents. Next slide. The one and two bedroom housing wages are not just unaffordable for minimum wage workers, but workers in a number of large occupations. 11 of the 25 largest occupations in the country pay a median hourly wage that is lower than the one and two bedroom housing wages. Workers in these 11 occupations make up 35% of the total US workforce, excluding farm workers. These occupations include things like food and beverage services, retail services, food preparation workers, home health aides, and nursing assistants. Next slide. And amid record-breaking rental prices, this year's report also focuses on the significant rent increases affecting so many communities across the country. We examine historical rent prices across 345 metropolitan counties and found that between the first quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, rental prices in the median county increased $179. This is far higher than the previous 4 years, where the median county increased between $25 and $39. These increases were not isolated in just a few big cities either. All but 2 metropolitan counties experienced rent increases between the first quarter of 2021 and 2022. The report details some of the trends that have led to these rent increases, including record high rental demand, record low vacancy rates, as well as increasing investor purchases. Next slide. The report also highlights the huge disparities that Black, Latino, and Indigenous households face in affording housing compared to white households. These disparities are illustrated in this graph, which shows hourly wages by percentile for Black, Hispanic, and white households. The 50th percentile represents the median wage for each racial and ethnic group. And as you can see, Black and Hispanic households earning the median wage earn approximately $6 less per hour than white households. While the median white household can nearly afford a 2-bedroom home, the median Black and Hispanic household cannot even afford a 1-bedroom home. The report concludes with a call to action for sustained federal investments in rental housing. And I'm going to stop there and hand it back over to Jen and see if the Chairwoman might be ready.
Yes, hello. Let's see if we are ready. Just one moment. We actually just have one moment and she will be all set to join. In the meantime, we encourage you to utilize the Q&A box. Please do submit your questions, and following the address from Chairwoman Waters, we will be taking those questions. So yes, please do take advantage of that. You can, like I said, submit them in the Q&A, or if you have any questions following the call, you can send them directly to me via email or any interview requests as well. Of course, send those requests to me directly as well. And that's at jbutler@nlihc.org. And so that'll just be one more minute as we prepare for Chairwoman Waters. Okay, we are all set. We are going to now send it over to deliver our address. We have with us Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Chairwoman of the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services. Chairwoman Waters, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh boy, oh boy. Thank you guys so very, very much for this press conference and continuing this fight and this struggle for assisting the homeless, supporting families with vouchers in Section 8, etc. This is a very difficult time for families of low income ability. So I'm pleased to be here to discuss how today's soaring rental costs are increasing out of reach families. I'm honored that the National Low Income Housing Coalition invited me to author the preface of this report, which highlights the extraordinary gap between what families are earning and what they need to earn to keep a roof over their head. This report underscores just how pressing this issue remains, especially in light of rising inflation and widening inequality that people are experiencing. As many of you know, I've been urging my colleagues in Congress to pass long overdue and significant investments to build more fair and affordable housing. Yesterday, however, news broke that the White House has reached an agreement with Senator Manchin on a reconciliation deal that only includes a disappointing $1 billion in new investments in housing. I'm more than concerned. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm more than disappointed. It is unconscionable for this country, with the resources that we have, to ignore the housing crisis in America. There is indeed a housing crisis. Over 560,000 or more people are sleeping on the streets every night in this country. And so many families are unable to pay the rent. And so without the historic housing investments that I've secured in the Build Back Better Act, we will never truly address the underlying economic conditions that drive inflation and leave so many families on the cusp of eviction and homelessness. And while I'm disappointed by this development, of course I remain undeterred in pushing for additional housing funds. My constituents and people across this country cannot afford to wait on these investments. It's shocking, for example, that in my city of Los Angeles, a person must earn $30.85 an hour for a one-bedroom apartment, not a luxurious apartment, but a modest one-bedroom apartment. It is indeed a tragedy that we're only able to come up with $1 billion to meet this crisis and this need. By the numbers, it's clear that housing costs are out of reach for many individuals and working families. $30.85 per hour is far above California's current minimum wage of $15 an hour. And so, in fact, California's minimum wage is only half of what a person needs to make to afford a one-bedroom apartment. And if you have a family, you'll need even more income to adequately house your family. The housing shortage is certainly making matters worse. The housing shortage in California alone is making matters so much worse for so many families. There is a shortage of nearly 1 million rental homes, 960,000 to be exact. And Los Angeles is not the only place where this is happening. Nowhere in this country can someone working a full-time minimum wage job afford a modest two-bedroom apartment, despite having a job or multiple jobs. Individuals and families all across this country are struggling to find housing or maintain the cost of their housing needs. Nationwide, there's a shortage of nearly 7 million homes that are affordable and available to people with extremely low incomes. Around the country, the nation's affordable housing crisis has left millions of people at risk of eviction. In worst cases, we have more than 580,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night because of this crisis. And not to mention that these high costs are burdening families and their everyday budgets, often leaving little room for groceries, gas, childcare, healthcare, savings, and emergencies. It's also important to highlight that there are significant racial and economic disparities among renters. High rental costs disproportionately burden people of color, low-income renters, families with children, and single-parent households. For example, according to this report, Black and Latinx workers are more likely to hold low-wage jobs compared to white workers, and Black and Latinx households are more likely to be renters. For a long time, the cost of housing has been outpacing wages. So the task before my committee is to do what we can to bring down the skyrocketing housing costs and to make housing more affordable for all. To do that, we must invest in housing. As this report shows, these investments are more urgent than ever. And this is why, as chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, I've been fighting tirelessly for robust, fair, and affordable housing investments. During the pandemic, I secured $46.6 billion in emergency rental assistance, which prevented over 6 million families from being evicted. Now, we need long-term structural investments. The $150 billion that I secured in the Build Back Better Act would create or preserve more than 1 million homes that are affordable and accessible to families in need, and includes $65 billion of that to address long overdue repairs and rebuild our nation's public housing to be more climate resilient and energy efficient. It's $1 billion of that, $1 billion for new housing choice vouchers to support families struggling to afford their rent and help people escape homelessness and domestic violence. $26 billion of that $150 billion was there to create and preserve affordable and accessible housing to address the nation's housing shortage. And of course, $10 billion of that was in down payment assistance to make the dream of home ownership possible for the millions of mortgage-ready first-generation home buyers, among other critical housing investments. And so, as I said in the past, housing is not a nice to have, it is a must have. And as I continue the fight for fair and affordable housing in Congress, I think the National Low Income Housing Coalition for its ongoing commitment to providing the research and advocacy, and especially this important resources needed to uplift the housing needs of families left behind for far too long. Let me just say that the recent information about what is going to be available in this deal that has been made for $1 billion for housing is shameful. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm angered by it. And of course, even the $150 billion that I advocated for that went into Build Back Better was not enough. I really wanted $300 billion, but I got agreed upon in my committee with my members, and it passed the House $150 billion. And then to have this reconciliation with an amount of $1 billion is more than I can take. And so I'm going to be asked a lot about this. And I don't think that I can be so conciliatory about this. I'm upset. And I'm going to continue the fight in every way that I possibly can. Thank you so very much for having me on the press conference today.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you so much for all of your work, your commitment, and your dedication, and of course, for authoring the preface of this year's report. We are going to now close out the call with some questions received from the media. As a reminder, if there are any unanswered questions or interview interview requests, please do email me directly with those. So the first question that we have, are racial disparities explored on a state level? Andrew or Emma, would you mind please answering?
Yeah, we don't have racial disparities explored on the state level within the report just because the data source we use is only national. But if you have questions about a specific state, feel free to reach out and we might be able to look into it.
Great, thank you. The next question, what's being done? How are groups like NLIHC supporting families who don't make the national housing wage get housing in lieu of government, federal and local action, especially since housing isn't included in the reconciliation bill so far? I'll turn that over to our president and CEO, Diane Yantel.
Sure, thanks for the question. The federal government needs to intervene, and in order to house the lowest income people, extremely low income renters, people experiencing homelessness, it requires subsidy because developers can't build and operate apartments at a cost that is affordable to the lowest income tenants for the rent that they can pay towards that unit. That's a basic market failure, and it requires government intervention. And the scale of the challenge that we face across the country requires federal intervention. Another report that we put out every year is called The Gap, and that's where we quantify the shortage of homes affordable and available to the lowest income people. And nationally, there is a shortage of 7 million homes affordable and available to the lowest income people. So another way of saying that same number is for every 10 of the lowest income renter households, there are fewer than 4 apartments that are affordable and available to them. So in the meantime, what low-income renters are doing is struggling mightily to keep roofs over their heads. And when they can't, they are falling into homelessness with all of its associated costs to that family, to the community, and to the country. And so at the National Income Housing Coalition, we will continue to push the federal government to make investments at the scale necessary to expand proven solutions to homelessness and housing poverty, like the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the National Housing Trust Fund, and the Public Housing Program. Unfortunately, that money is not included in this reconciliation package. It is a tremendous missed opportunity and incredibly short-sighted decision. So just as Chair Waters said, she will keep fighting. We will as well to ensure that federal, state, and local governments make investments at the scale necessary to address the housing crisis.
Thank you, Diane. We do have a question for Chairwoman Waters. Is Chairwoman Waters still on the call? If not, we'll be sure to forward this to her team. And Caitlin, I'll be sure to get the response. Oh, wonderful.
Yes, I'm on. You have a question?
Yes, the question for you is, will you vote for the new reconciliation package if it clears the Senate and is taken up in the House?
I don't know, and I have not made a commitment to do so in the way that I'm feeling now. I am not committed to voting for it. And I've got a lot that I've got to say to, leadership. I've got a lot that I want to express about how unconscionable it is for the Four Corners to get together and forget about the housing crisis. And I want to know, why didn't they let us know in advance so that we could gather all of our advocates and push a little bit harder before they signed off on the deal? So I don't know that I'm going to vote for it. I have not decided to vote for it.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters. Do we have any remaining questions? We'll allow just for one more minute or so for any remaining questions.
Okay. You know what, while you're here,
All right. Well, that seems to conclude the questions. We thank you all again so much for joining us today. A special thanks to Chairwoman Waters for joining us today, for her address and for authoring the preface, and to our NLIHC President and CEO, Diane Yantel, and our entire fantastic research team. If you have not done so already, we encourage you to review this year's report and all of our resources on NLIHC.org. And please do reach out to me directly for any additional questions and interview requests. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Thanks once more for joining.